coming down, firstly to New Zealand, I think later in the week, and it brings up questions for those of us who are interested in these things about monarchies and republicanism, and obviously the referendum was a long time ago, back in '99, but these questions come up occasionally, and perhaps we thought it might be an interesting time to just revisit some of the key issues. And we've got David de Lima from the Australian Monarchist League, who's very kindly decided to come on air with us and just perhaps answer a few questions. David, how are you tonight?
Very well, thank you, Ashley.
Good. Thanks for calling in. Look, I'm just really interested if we could start with first principles and go back and cover things like why you believe, obviously, the monarchy is relevant today and the best system of government for us here in Australia.
Well, that's a very interesting question. You've mentioned 1999, which was, of course, the referendum when the people of Australia were called to the ballot box and invited to pass judgment on a particular Republican model that was up for grabs.
Mm-hmm.
And even Republicans were voting against it. So, in some sense, the question isn't entirely monarchy versus republic, but what kind of republic? And the kind of republic that was on offer was soundly defeated at the ballot box on the 6th of November 1999.
But, and some people would argue there was some clever politics along the way which helped, I guess, helped kibosh that. But going back to, as I said, the question, really an open question, why do you believe the monarchy is the system we should have as it is at the moment?
Well, I have a personal view on that, of course. Now, I must say that I wear more than one hat, and your listeners will probably know my name more in relation to Family Voice Australia, which used to be called Festival of Light. And we vigorously opposed the model that was on offer because we thought that it was inferior, and because our organisation is keen to uphold the current civic system, whatever it might be, and because that happens to be a monarchical system, then that's the one that we promote. And to that extent, I'm free to encourage the Australian Monarchist League, which is one of several groups that I'm involved in. But so that's the preface. Now, the answer to the question, of course, is that it's the system that we've chosen for this nation. We chose it at the ballot box more than 100 years ago. We had the opportunity to get rid of it in 1999, and we decided not to. So we must always respect the voters, and though you've mentioned the political machinations that were going on, we can't blame politicians for the way that the Australian people vote, and if they reject a model that was offered, then we have to say, well, the people have spoken.
Okay, well, let me play devil's advocate, if you don't mind. I mean, some people would say that, you know, when we've chosen it, as you say, it was chosen under different circumstances when we were very much, how would you say it? We were a colony. We were part of the old British Empire. Things have changed. We've grown as a nation. Why do you? What you've given us is obviously a conservative argument. That is, things are good enough as they are. Why mess with it? I guess. Why should we be happy with a system that's been around for centuries for another nation on the other side of the world, which admittedly we were a colony of, but you know, arguably we've outgrown?
Yes, well, if people want to put up a model that they think will work, then it can be considered. But the republics of the world are largely characterised by misery, or at least the failure of freedom. There are some successful republics, but there are some awful ones as well.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas most of the stable nations are, in fact, constitutional monarchies. You think of the Scandinavian nations, Britain, of course, Australia, New Zealand, and so I think there's a tremendous benefit to the system that we have compared to other nations. And so we need to really be asking ourselves, well, what has made it work? And if we're going to make any change, can we be certain that the change will either be as good as what we have or even better? And I think that would be almost impossible, if not impossible. And the people who have sat around and thought long and hard about this have struggled to come up with something that will not only provide neutrality, but also provide grace at the heart of the civic system, and that's what we have currently. Certainly, you wouldn't characterise the presidents of various republics as being gracious, whereas that's the adjective that readily springs to mind when we think of our Queen.
Well, look, I don't have a strong view on this one way or the other. I guess, again, just playing devil's advocate, some people would say that not only is it an antiquated system, but the Queen represents the aristocracy, which is sort of a very unfair and undemocratic system, you know, and it's based on the class system in England, where you have the haves and the have-not, and obviously the aristocracy rule, you know, the sort of the normal people, and they still have a very strong class system. Presumably, and we're going to speak to someone from the Republican side later on, but presumably one of the things is we've got this representative of an antiquated and unfair, essentially undemocratic system as our figurehead. Most of the arguments you've given are conservative, and I understand the sort of let's keep the status quo. It's a you know, it's a stable system, but you haven't really come out strongly in favour of the monarchy. So you're saying that it's really, you know, if someone else came up with a stable system, you would actually be quite happy to look at it?
Well, I have a personal view, and I am a monarchist deep down. I don't resolve from that, but I'm just thinking about answering the question in terms of our national perspective, the voters of Australia, what they want and what will be good for our nation. And as I say, the republics out there in the world largely are not able to match the stability that we enjoy in this nation. So I think pragmatism is a very important thing. You've certainly raised some issues about democracy and fairness, but the truth is that most people really quite like the notion of royalty, and most of the world will be tuned in on the 29th of April to watch the royal wedding, and we have a great love for it. And when the Queen goes to America, people just about fall over. They've lost something there, and they probably regret it to some extent.
Although talking about republics, David, I guess America is one example of one of the ones that is a very stable and successful one.
Yes, it is, but there are problems, and one of the problems is that they do not have a neutral head of state. The president is a political creature, and this was why a lot of Republicans were voting no on the 6th of November 1999, because they were afraid that there would be political interference in relation to the presidency, and they didn't want that. They didn't want that because they recognised that you've got to have a neutral umpire. So we have that in the office of the Governor-General, but the Governor-General is the Queen's representative, which means that the Governor-General is guided in this case, her ministry, by what the Queen would do if the Queen were here doing the job, which of course she isn't because she's living somewhere else. But the notion of neutrality is a most important one. The Americans don't have it, which is why there is no one to watch over procedure in America. The other point about America is that the president is very powerful, and that means that the president is a rival towards the Congress, which is the equivalent of the Parliament there. And that means that, and this happens routinely, the Parliament or Congress will pass legislation and the President will refuse to sign it. So much for democracy. There are two power centres, they rival each other. If the Congress is sufficiently convinced about something, it can overrule the presidential veto, but this is asking a lot. But routinely, American presidents will say to Congress, I'm not going to sign your democratically passed bill into law because it doesn't suit my agenda.
Okay. We're talking to David de Lima from the Australian Monarchist League, and he's happy to take your calls, 8223 0000. We'll go back to David after the break. It's only right. Well, look, thanks for that. And just, I guess, a final question, David. So you've more or less answered the question, but the chance of us having another vote on a referendum anytime soon, I guess you'd say pretty much zero.
Well, there are much more important things on the agenda, and no politician's going to touch a losing issue, because politicians want success. So this is a poison chalice for members of Parliament. They talk a bit about it, but I would be very surprised if in the next 50 years there's any change.
All right. Well, look, David, thanks again for your time, and have a good evening.
Thank you.